Thank you, Maria. Maria and Rolf and the team invited us here really to talk about Active City, and really it's quite an unusual role that we have as an architect because we are really involved here in talking about how to make the best active ground floor plane that we possibly can. And this is really across the whole of the Bjørvika North area just at the moment. So we've been working very hard over the last 10 or 11 months. It's a very collaborative process. A lot of our work is steeped in retail and food and beverage and cultural and things like that. But it's very important to stress that we've been working with all the different plot architects. So each of the buildings, we've been working with them. We've been working with all the landscape architects, plus the developers as well. So it's quite unusual because it's very, very collaborative. And what you see here is really the results of a lot of talking and debating and collaborating as well. So you can see all the different pieces here.
And my name is John Morgan. I'm also from Leonard Design Architects. Dave and I and Hin, our colleague who's with us today, have worked both in-house for a developer, running an in-house developer's design team, and have our own practice as well. So we hope we bring a unique vision as a firm of architects who understand what is needed to be delivered within a project, but also understanding how to make the ground floor plane and deliver the active city as well.
So what was great, I think, Maria, was your video as well, showing actually the ground floor really is all about the people who occupy them, the businesses who are there, the people who live there, the front doors and things like that. So we're very passionate about streets, about public accessibility, about squares, about exploiting, sunshine and sunlight. And really, our influence here is really on this ground floor plane. And we need to, sort of deal with a whole host of different subjects. Whether we talk about activity and the uses that are going in, combining landscaping, lighting, both within the landscape and on the buildings, signage on the buildings and on the shop fronts as well, shop front designs, where street levels are and what the best, levels are for them, floor materials, canopies, entrances, shop front heights. How to give the best presence for all the businesses that are in the ground floor, or all the cultural activities as well. These ground floors need to be very flexible because they've got to be adaptable for the future as well. Permeability is very, very key, and accessibility for the public and pedestrians going through to them. All businesses want to be seen, so we're very obsessed about sight lines to the ground floor, and the configuration needs to be very flexible as well. So we work a lot with the tenants and the tenant guidelines, and also with Maria on the leasing strategy, and also with Remy Olsen as well, who on all of those kinds of things too.
And I guess what we hope we bring to this project is we're very privileged to work all over the world on projects such as this, where we are working with developers and communities in delivering this type of large-scale project, creating new pieces of cities where people will come, and how that works. And that gives us the ability to bring all of that experience from working in Melbourne or in London or in Warsaw or in Copenhagen to this project, and bring those learnings from and the ability to see the global trends that are emerging in development, and bring that thinking to this project.
So on a large scale, it's really good to sort of code out the ground floor, because it does sort of breathe a little bit of life into it. So you can sort of sense where the best places are for restaurants, for food and beverage, cafes, for bars, best places for culture, where the entrances to offices or residential are, and also where the shops can go as well. So the context is very, very important here.
And when we look at that, one of the first things to look at is the flows of people and the hierarchy of the space as well. So the pink space at the top, is the very, very strong boulevard and transportation connection. The blue area is the neighbourhood street, which will have a different character. The yellow is the waterfront promenade, which will be very important in terms of drawing tourists into this space as well. And then throughout that is linked with the orange lines, which are kind of lanes and passageways that allow people people, when they come to this part of the city, to have a unique and bespoke experience. Each time you come, you may have a different route that you take, and that will form a different experience when you're coming through this part of the development.
So we're zooming in really on the 4 principal building blocks here on Bjørvika North, and working on the ground floor plane to fully exploit it, to make sure that our public spaces and our streets and our squares and what have you are working to the best of their ability.
So the key thing in this is that it's not that you want all space to be very, very big, very, very grand and very, very busy. It's important that we have a combination of spaces. So we will have very large, grand parks and public spaces, but right through to intimate laneways so that there is a different experience. And therefore that informs the type of ground floor accommodation that we will have, where the restaurants will be located in the sunny parts of the city, where the culture will be located, where the local retailers will be located. It's important we have this variety and dynamic set of streets and a network of spaces.
And out of that comes really a spatial network plan. So we talk here about where the best place for active frontages are, shared surfaces. One of the big changes I think is more emphasis in the last 10 months on the pedestrian and the cyclist and less of the car and the motor vehicle. So you'll see some of the changes occurring within there on that. So traffic and pedestrian zones, seating areas, where the best place for those, where can we exploit those most? Protecting views and vistas, the park areas and play areas that go within that as well, and that's working with the landscape architects, and the difference between vibrant spaces and quieter spaces as well.
So when we look at those vibrant spaces and those quiet spaces, we will have, very large, vibrant park spaces. We will have more intimate spaces that are about local interest. And we will also have vibrant corners and crossroads as well. And they will sit, along this high street and ensure that there is a variety and a hierarchy of the spaces so that each one can have a different character and a different feel, and therefore gives a different experience as you move through this part of the development. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple of the blocks as examples to show the type of work we've been doing and why what we do is spend a lot of time getting into the real detail of that ground floor. As David says, looking at the perimeter of the spaces, working with the leasing team to understand what flexibility and what spaces are required. So therefore we can build the spaces that the tenants are looking to come to. So we take each block and we take the buildings, we collaborate with the architects, the highways engineers, the landscape architects, and we work our way around the building and around the project and look at where we need to kind of create more prominence for corners, where the front of the building will be. We will look at then breaking down the entrance of the building so that there's a permeability through the building and through and into courtyards. We'll look even at the location of the cores and where the lifts and the stairs are located, often pulling them back from the facade of the building to allow more activity and more frontage along the streetscape. And with each building, we will look at the different configuration and the different opportunities on each side of the building. Some of these buildings face onto very busy roads, some face onto water, some face onto intimate streets, and all that needs to be picked up in the architecture of the building, but also the materials that are used in the shop fronts as well.
So whilst when we came on board the master plan was fixed, the buildings were pretty much designed. The last 10 months has really been how can we make the ground floor as good as we all possibly can as a team. So specifically, so I'll just go back one, just so specifically, the issues that, as John was highlighting, are looking at opening up the colonnades to be as attractive as it can, so people walk under the colonnades and not necessarily in the open area. Where the best places are for flexible shop fronts, so opening out shop fronts or cafes if they're suitable for those kinds of things. Looking at the configuration of cores to see if we can make more flexible and sustainable and flexible tenanted space at the ground floor as well, and looking at each of the residential entrances too. So we've got a number of before and after shots, just to say what's happened over the last 10 months or so. So about 10 months ago, the buildings all designed, absolutely beautiful set of buildings. We absolutely love the project and all of the architecture that's in it as well. Our responsibility here, to work with everybody on the ground floor here, This is the before shot, and then the after shot here, in terms of what it could look like. You can see where we've been concentrating on here, and it's all about and this is on Queen Euphemia's Street here, but having curved corners, opening up the entrance so you walk along the colonnades. It's all about retractable or fixed sunshades and blinds on there, big double height shops, and prominent signage as well that is backlit, so you can see it during the day and during the night as well. And again, on Opera Gata itself, one of the biggest changes, I think, has been the work that's gone into sort of change the appearance of what actually will be a very pedestrian and cycle-friendly environment there, and a very active ground floor, and turn that into something that is completely, that has evolved a huge amount over the last 10 months. And there's been a lot of work that's gone on in making sure that ground floor, in fact, we're talking about ground floor and the first floor in a way, right up to the top of the, the colonnades there. But you can see the overall effect there, and just, I think, the positive nature of having people really looking after that ground floor and what it could mean there, and making it accessible to everybody.
And often in these projects you have the non-retail architecture, so the residential, the office city above, that comes all the way down to the ground, and therefore the ground floor can struggle, and therefore a lot of it is for us to make sure that ground floor is as positive and as strong as possible.
So again, this is the before image, and the after image then sort of seeks really to sort of open this out as much as possible, looking at the routes through, and the landscape has evolved as well.
So when we look at the next block, so as the next block along, again, this has a different set of criteria within the project. We collaborate with the architects, the landscape architects, the parks and the highways as well. And again, we work around the building and we look at the difference. And with this building, it was very much about just pulling the corners back a little, just to make the public spaces just a little bit more generous, looking at the alignment of the pedestrian routes to ensure that the kind of footfall fell around the building in the correct place, and also creating these more quiet spaces in the centre and the courtyards of the buildings.
One of the differences, and each building, of course, in building block, has its own character, it has its own architecture, and it has its own character at the ground floor. So the way that the ground floors are treated are slightly different in each case as well. So in the previous block, the corners were more rounded. In this block here, they wave in and they're sort of sharper edges, but they're opened out in slightly different ways. And the materials are slightly different as well within the shop fronts itself. So this is the before shot, and then a series of after images that show really the detail that is now going into all of the shop fronts and the signage and the graphics. So it's actually these shop fronts will be they'll be metal shop fronts, but in a gold colour throughout here. There'll be prominent backlit signage on here, integrated floor finishes coming underneath the arcades as well as out in the open air, and key actually pedestrian crossings, crossing the street being aligned with the colonnades to encourage people to go along the shop fronts instead of missing them, and an improvement in the shop front lines by opening them up as we get towards the corners in there as well, to encourage people to use those. And you can really see that on this photograph, this image here, where the corners are opened up to encourage more people to be by the shop fronts there. And again, attention to detail, attention to the tenants and the users who will be down at that ground floor as well, to make them the best they can possibly be. Again, another before shot, and the biggest difference again here is the nature of the highway, which had more of an appearance of a road, but now we go to to how it's proposed now over the last 10 months. It's a very, very friendly pedestrian and cycle friendly environment through there.
And then we come to this cluster of the buildings that sit on the waterfront, and these will be very, very important to communicate, across the Opera House and across to the museum as well, to bring tourists around this waterfront promenade space as well. And also these buildings will have an intricate set of laneways as well that give this idea that people will be able to come and explore this space. There will be routes that are very, very clear and obvious for people flow, but there will be less obvious routes as well, because we want there to be discovery and delight in the way that people come and explore this part of the development.
This is a really important part of the overall project. I think it's a beautiful set of buildings here, but you can see on all fronts here, it's facing onto probably the most busy, part of Bjørvika North, the big public realm. But through Opera Garden here, of course, you've got the principal flow of people. The community will use that as their high street, but then you've got the more intimate wharf frontage and wharf edge, and then some sort of semi-private areas with water sitting through the back there. And the difference in scale between, some of the narrower and the wider ones, we think is worth fully exploiting, and this will be a lovely, lovely part of the project, we think. So some of the before images, again, was concentrating really, I think, on the hierarchy of the streets and the spaces and things like that. And our work really over the last few months, working with the architects here, is again to be fully to exploit the ground floor plane here. And again, there's a bit of a difference here between the other two blocks. Here, actually, the stone facades do come down to the building, so the shop fronts and the entrances here is much more about punching holes in a stone building to exploit again. And the materials on here is a mixture of oak and raw aluminium, in a way as well. And in some cases they pop out, some cases they come back into the building, and there are all sorts of little tricks. And this is a very sort of inventive set of buildings here, which have a different character as to how they front onto the public realm. Again, before looking down quite, one of the much more narrower, almost alleyways coming through there, and then the after one. So we're really interested and really like the idea. You might have a little servery coming out to, the people coming up. So they could have, it could be part of a coffee bar, but just helps on all aspects. And I think it's just the inventiveness around here then that gives those little details that I think make things better as they go along.
And I think these details allow these smaller spaces to be unique and not secondary. Often you can have very, very grand spaces that are very primary, and then you have narrow spaces that are secondary. What we want to do is make these smaller spaces as prime, but have their own identity and character.
But this might be, so just go back one, it might well be, yes, this is the side-on, servery to a coffee bar or something. But as you go a little bit further, there might be an art gallery within there. An art gallery doesn't need to be on a busy street. It can be on more of an intimate courtyard. And it helps to give, some of that culture and activity then to those spaces. So it's really important that we're all talking all of the time to fully exploit, this ground floor and the potential that it actually has. And then finally, as this block actually faces onto the Munch Museum and the Opera, and the Opera House, and the lower reaches coming out onto the waterfront, what a great place we think this will be. Really, really lovely. And then, yes, I think you can see from this view here the integration of the play areas, the activity of the main public space, with probably the busiest route coming through here in terms of people flows, and this being much more of an exploration route, and lots of places for people to sit in the sun, watching the boats, watching what's going on down there, and a lot of public realm as well through there. So it's really exciting, I think, to see all of those coming together.
And I think this block shows very strongly how hard some of these buildings have to work, that one side of the building has to have a completely different character and do a completely different job to the opposite side of the building, and how we get that to work as a building in its own right as well, working with the architects. And then the final block, so again, this has a completely different set of character. Okay, it's further away from the tourism, but obviously sits opposite the barcode part of the scheme. And this is a hugely exciting part of the project.
I mean, this has got a really important role to play. It's right on the corner of two busy streets, and it's also protecting Opera Garden as it turns around and goes through into the rest of the master plan as well. So it has different kinds of activity on all of its frontages. So on here it's busy and trafficked. Here it's busy and trafficked, but with great views to the park. Here is, it's a cascading, canal coming down into water here. And of course this route here, which turns Opera Garden, this will actually be very, very busy. This is one of the higher footfalls coming across here into this very busy corner. So at the end of here, there's a hole punched into the facade here, which takes you into the courtyard. And again,
That's great. We're done. No problem.
Actually,
we're nearly done.
Time here.
We promise.
So from the street itself, this is looking along Opera Garden to the hole in the wall, looking into the courtyard, as we said. This is how it was 10 months ago, and we've been working with Mario and Mario's team at our lab as well. Again, just to see how we can make some slight differences and tweaks, and and exploit that ground floor. And here, you see an example. The shop fronts will actually zigzag along, and that helps us to create little places for, tables and chairs and cafes.
And it's also very important that the place can have a transition from day to night through the lighting as well. So this place feels safe and exciting in the day and at night as well.
Looking back along Opera Garden, so you've got your back now to the, to the arch there, all the way up to, the opera itself. Again, you can see the character of Opera Garden itself has evolved quite a lot over the last 10 months, through here. We're down to 2 minutes now. So the before shot, this is looking here on the southwest corner of this, and then the after shot just shows actually by opening up slightly more on here and paying more attention, I think, to the amount of openness on there, we can get more seats and prominence onto there. So.
And I think, we do have shop fronts that face onto very busy roads and very, very busy transport boulevards. And these are shop fronts you'll see for a very short period of time when you're travelling by the tram or travelling by car. And therefore, they have to be bigger and strong and bolder because the amount of time people spend passing them will be much shorter as well. And therefore, this side of the building will have a very different character.
So the last 2 or 3, again, are new sort of CGIs that exploit all of these sort of corners and entrances. And again, I think this is one of the really important slides here that shows, how all of this can be put together. And then we zoom out and start doing the more aerial views and then finish on the last one.
And I think it's interesting, we spoke at the beginning when we first met the team and we were appointed on the project. It was because we were working in lots of different towns and cities across the world, and we could bring that thinking to this project. I mean, now, we take that, we take all the knowledge from this project.
So we're telling the rest of the world what we're doing here. We think this is an amazing project, absolutely amazing. So, a few weeks ago we were telling, the municipality and or the planning people in Melbourne, in Australia. We've been saying about, this in Malaysia and in London as well. Just how you are putting, your master plan together and how you're actually implementing it. We think it's absolutely brilliant and a really, really good way as to how to do master planning and implementing it properly. Yeah. And we are telling the rest of the world.
Definitely. Good. Yeah, deal. Fantastic. Thank you.